Okay. All right, so we're going to be talking about the Renaissance today a little bit further, and we're going to connect the art of the Renaissance and the interest that the various patrons of the Renaissance, the artists of the Renaissance had. Okay, we're going to connect that to also a greater study, the study of what we call the liberal arts, right? Studia Humanities, right? As the liberals call it. We're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by liberals, why this was happening in 1300 through 1600, and all that. So let me pray for us and we'll get started. Father, thank you for today. I pray that you'd be with us as we try to navigate having class, recording class for those who are home. Be with us here, be with those who are at home, and return them to health or keep them healthy. I pray that you help our discussion today to be profitable, to be meaningful, and that you let us move forward with ease and proceed in this school year. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so if you haven't, I think I saw this morning that 4 people had already accepted the little invite. If you haven't done that, please do that today. And you guys, I'll try to get on there and get that done toward the end of class or after class is over. Okay, so we were talking about the city-states of Italy. Italy was not a united country until 1870, right? Italy was not a united country until 1870. And that's a long, long time away from 1300, right? And so Italy existed instead as a collection of city-states. And these city-states all got along and supported each other in war and were best friends. Yes, Katrina? No, right? The city-states were against each other, competitors, yes? They fought over territory. They made deals with other nations to try to increase their territorial boundaries, right? So these city-states, they functioned somewhat like their own countries, and they were ruled by a prince, okay? And sometimes that prince had a lot of power, and sometimes that prince was a rather weak prince, right? Depended on their power structure, what they were able to consolidate, and it also depended on how the ruling of the people was going. So from your reading, guys, what was the name of the common people in an Italian city-state? What were the commoners called? Right, so you have the commoners in an Italian city-state, the popolo, okay? And their main interest is their financial status. Their main interest is survival. Their main interest is getting along with the city-states rulers. There's not a lot of the popolo that are voting, okay, or participating politically. For the most part, they are your farmers, your workers, your soldiers, okay, the common people. What do you call the people in Italy that were the rulers? Yes, Mia.
It's like signori.
Right, signori. Signori, okay? Your signori, what word do you see in there? Senior, seniority, right? These are your upper people, right? When you talk about a senior, you're talking about an upperclassman, right? So the signori were the group of people who were the rulers. And these rulers sometimes had enough power to rule even with a hereditary line, right? It depends on how powerful you are. Some rulers wax and wane. Some rulers get poisoned. Some rulers get taken out. And to be the ruler of an Italian city-state was sometimes a dangerous job because you didn't always survive it. Okay, there was a lot of jealousies and intrigue and court jealousies and the attempts to replace your brother or your father, okay, and the attempts to supplant the family line. Sometimes the rule was very well established, and it was very clear. The rule of this city-state will be handed down to this person. right? So the line was clearly established, but it was clearly established by the consolidation of power. So who knows from your world history classes, who knows an author who commented on this very idea of what it takes to be a successful ruler of a city-state, what it takes to stay on top? Let's see.
How to pronounce it? Machiavelli?
Machiavelli. That's right, Machiavelli. Okay, if someone today said about you, you heard that somebody said, oh, you know, Mia, she is very, very Machiavellian. Should you take that as a compliment or an offense? If somebody calls you Machiavellian, is it good or bad? Let's take a poll first. Is it good or bad? Who thinks it's good if you get called Machiavellian? Who thinks it's bad? Okay, so we know enough to know it's bad. Do we know what it means? Yes.
Ruthless or cunning?
Hmm?
Like ruthless or cunning?
Ruthless, cunning, right? If someone calls you Machiavellian, they're saying you will do what it takes to stay in power. You will do what it takes to stay in power. So correct. Machiavelli gave this advice. Who did he give the advice to? Hint. He gave the advice in the book by this name. He was giving advice to the prince. The prince. And so in his work, he gives advice about how to successfully rule, in this case, a city-state. How to stay on top. Now, sometimes there's a misunderstanding of exactly what Machiavelli said. And I am not saying that Machiavelli was suggesting being a nice person. He wasn't. But Machiavelli did not say that a prince should crush the people beneath him to a fine powder. And that should be the prince's modus operandi all the time. He was a little bit more refined than that. So what's probably the most commonly known principle from the prince? What if you think about somebody being Machiavellian and you want to sum up Machiavelli's advice to rulers in one phrase, does anybody know what it is? I know you'll have heard of this before. I just don't know if you can connect it to the prince. I can almost guarantee that every single one of you have heard this phrase. It is better to be
Feared than loved.
It is better to be feared than loved. How many of you have heard this before? It's better to be feared than loved. Or maybe you've heard it's better to be loved than feared, right? Maybe you've heard some kind of reverse take on this, right? Well, Machiavelli was giving advice. I want to make sure that our viewers can see the board okay here. There we go. Okay, so it's better to be feared than loved. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, Machiavelli does not suggest that the best way to rule a city-state is just to crush everybody and make everybody slaves. But remember, his whole point in The Prince is not about moral ruling or about what's best for a society, but to tell the prince, here's how you stay in control. Because that's what princes wanted to know in this very competitive environment. How do I avoid getting poisoned? Being thrown down a flight of stairs? And these are all real ways that Italian city-state rulers die. Okay? How do I avoid my own son trying to take me out? My own cousin, right? My own uncle. And so when you are looking at this, Machiavelli says, well, if you can be loved as a ruler, if you can get the people to love you, and they respond to you out of that love and loyalty, that's wonderful. Machiavelli says, if you can get that done, great. But then why is it better to be feared than loved? What does Machiavelli tell us in The Prince about human nature?
that like people do whatever they need to get something?
Yeah. And so he says, yeah, it's great to be loved and everything, but he says, you gotta remember something about humans. People are fickle. You know that word? Fickle means what?
It can change on a dime.
Yeah, they change their mind a lot. One day they like it, the next day they don't. You guys went to middle school. You know this is true, yes? When you're in middle school, you can be on top one day of the social ladder, and then you just show up the next day and you're like, how did this happen? Why am I persona non grata today? Why is everyone, I'm on the outs, right? Or your outfit can be great one day, and the next day you can be like, oh, that's over. And that's the fickleness, right, of human nature, the fickleness of mankind. So mankind is fickle, Machiavelli says. And so he says, yeah, they can change their mind on you. And so, yeah, maybe they might love you on Wednesday and hate you on Thursday. But he says, there's one cure for being fickle, and that's what? People want to stay alive. They want to stay out of jail. They don't want to get beaten up. And so they will obey out of fear. They will obey out of fear. If you can't get them to love you, at least get them to fear you. And that was the life of a lot of the Italian city-states. That was the approach, okay? And that was the environment that a lot of the Italian popolo, at least, found themselves in. And if you were in the signori, life could be great sometimes, and life could be not so great sometimes, right? Because your power was constantly being challenged. So this is one of the reasons, actually, why the city-state rulers competed in the arts, competed economically, because they wanted to make a name for themselves as a strong, competitive, able, capable leader. And one way you could do that, and one way that you could show your power, was showcasing a great city. So the video that you watched the other day, it talked about the city of what? The first video. It was all about Florence, right? The Renaissance in Florence. And you saw that the Medici, right, and other rulers were interested in making Florence great. Yes, economically through trade, but also through the creation of domes that had never been able to be seen before, right? These were statements of prowess about your city. And let me tell you, the other three Italian city-states, once that dome went up in the center of Florence, they were all gunning for a dome in their city. And they were giving orders to Da Vinci, to Donatello, to Michelangelo, right? To Raphael, and to lesser known people. I want the dome in my city looking better, bigger, higher, larger than that. That's reality, okay? But it did push the arts forward because innovation, aesthetic, beauty, richness, honor, these things were things that the rulers wanted, and to get it, they would pay money. They didn't just have to excel in the arts of war. They began to believe that it was okay to excel in other arts. One of those arts is politics. You might not think of politics as very artful, but you do have to be an artful and strategic person to work politically. All right, and those city-state rulers considered themselves to be experts in that, as well as growing experts in the other arts. Now, once in a while, there was rebellion against this. This came in the appearance of Savonarola, right, in the 1400s. Italy was rich, it was prosperous, and they had plenty of cash to spend, and things were getting very, very indulgent, right? Each city-state ruler was commissioning equestrian statues of themselves or large altar pieces to be painted in churches. And some donors didn't just have these things installed in churches, they wanted altar pieces just for their home, where they might have a small chapel, right, that adorned their home. And so they would pay an artist or commission an artist as a patron to create something for a church or for a private residence. And as Italy became more and more indulgent in these things, there was a religious leader by the name of Savonarola who showed up born in 1452, died in 1498, and he began to preach about aesthetic excess. He began to say, Italy's gone off the rails. We've forgotten our faith, we've forgotten religion, and all we do is decorate our churches and write fancy poetry and work on architecture, but these things are actually bad things because God is angry with Italy for its excess and its indulgence. Now listen, these city-state rulers, they weren't exactly known for their great morality. And sometimes the church got caught up in corruption, right? Taking the money of the poor and spending it on whatever commission, all based on the idea that a city-state's rulers or the popes of the church or bishops in the church would be glorified by what was being done. And Savonarola was a radical who began to preach that God is going to punish us. But he said God is going to punish us for our excess. So what kind of things did he preach against? The text says fancy clothing, cosmetics, pagan books, musical instruments, paintings, poetry, anything that celebrated human beauty would now be subject to the bonfire of the vanities. Right? So Savonarola says we need to repent for our obsession with all of this physical because it's taking away our attention from the spiritual. So let's burn it. Right? And for a little while, he's successful in getting the Italian common people to say, yeah, we have turned away from God. Maybe that's why a lot of bad things are happening in our country, right? Or maybe that's why we're not being blessed. His time period, right, did not really last very long. The Medici came back to power, but that's an example of the waxing and waning of power, right? When one group is up, the other group is down. When one group rises, the other group is down in their power. And so that shows you the ebb and flow of power, all right? But what the major thing coming out of all of this is, all right? The major point coming out of all of this, we can talk about the politics of it, we can talk about the practical nature, we can talk about the Italian wars, but what we're interested in for the most part in chapter 13 is the intellectual change that started to happen. And this is really, let's call this an intellectual shift. Your text calls it intellectual change. Let's call it intellectual shift because I don't want us to fall into a trap that if you think about it is very silly, okay? And that trap is thinking that from 500 to 1500 or 500 to 1300, no one had a thought go through their head. We were all in dark ages and people were akin to animals. I mean, do you really think that people's IQ was lower for 1,000 years? It doesn't even make any sense, right? It's just that the focus was different. Now, we've already talked last week about the fact that one of the things that people had to focus on in the Middle Ages was what?
Disease.
Disease.
Food.
Food, right? Not starving. Invasion from barbarians. So that kind of took up a lot of their time. Yes, but also what was part of the intellectual change is just a complete and utter shift from a God-centered world to a man-centered world. Now, in the video that you watched at the end of class, what did the chief ethicist at Google suggest that people do? Quit your technology job and get a humanities degree. Let's talk about humanities. What happened here in the intellectual shift is that society went from a God-centered view to a human-centered view. There was a newfound respect and a shift to the importance of man. Now, Okay? I wanna make sure that we understand this. In the Renaissance, which we're talking about, what years, my friends? 1300 to 1600. Would I be correct in saying that in the Renaissance, it was decided that man is the measure of all things and religion is unimportant? No, Lexi says, and she's right. When in history would you say that religion began to take a back seat as the center of people's worldview? It's a period. Should have learned about it in a world history class. When in history would you say that people started saying, well, religion is okay, but really there's another thing that can replace religion as our measure for being a good person, what's true and not true, what's vital to study and what is not vital to study? I'd actually take one of two answers for this. Okay, I'll give you some names from the periods, and then you tell me what period I'm talking about, okay? Galileo, Isaac Newton, Tycho Brahe, the scientific revolution. During the scientific revolution, you guys with me on this? Now listen, hold on a second. Hold on for a second. Okay, I appreciate that you're taking notes and I think it's great. But you make sure if you're writing down the scientific revolution that you say, this isn't the time period of the scientific revolution yet. You with me on that? Don't confuse yourself. Okay, the scientific revolution, yes? It's because sometimes it's okay to just sit and just listen and fill with your mind. This is one of those moments, okay? Okay, scientific revolution. Oh my gosh, she said scientific revolution. I'm going to forget this. Everybody just chill out for a second, okay? Scientific revolution is a time when people said, you know what? Maybe science has all the answers to everything I need, not God. Yes or no? Yes. Okay, what's its counterpart? Can you do it without me giving you the names? I said I'd take two things. The scientific revolution or no? Okay, I'll give you some names. Rousseau, Diderot, D'Alembert, Locke, the Enlightenment. Okay, now do we remember these? Okay, so in the Enlightenment, maybe somebody said, you know what? I think man is the center of all truth and reality. And maybe they said, you know what? I think scientific discoveries are the center of all truth and reality. Yes? In the Renaissance, did people say, you know what? I think art is the measure of all things? No. All that happened in the shift in the Renaissance is that the importance of the man as a thinker, a creator, a being with emotions, intellect, will, and reason began to take a little bit more of the stage. A good way to think about this that Mr. Eckert used to talk about, we used to teach this class, we taught this class together for a couple of years, and it was called A Christian View of the Arts. And one of the things that we talked about when we got to the Renaissance is that in this period would be the first time that you would really see artists putting their names on their works. I think the video talked about that. Isn't that kind of interesting? An artist would put their name to a work. Now, sometimes you'll go to a church or a museum or a house. Remember the Ringling Museum that we were talking about, Makatazan, the house that's there? If you go to that house, one of the architects of the house put himself in caricature in these ceiling tiles, right? And they'll show you, oh, that's him. But he didn't sign his name to the house, right? Can you imagine in a Gothic cathedral, right, that someone put their name on it? No. They don't put their name on it at all. And think about how many people's labor it took to build a cathedral of that size. Anonymous people who you'll never know their names. In modern times, we walk into a building and it might have a picture of the architect and a list of everybody who paid for the building. That was not true in the Middle Ages, okay? When you went into a Gothic cathedral, you were not looking around for a signature. You were not looking around for a picture of the architect. When you walk into a Gothic cathedral, where are you looking?
For all of the art?
Maybe. You know where you're looking? It's the same when you walk into the secular sanctuary. Up. Everything in the building is designed for you to, as soon as you step in, you look up. We're going to a big church. Stained glass, right? It's up here. Buttresses that are holding everything up, but are also decorated. You're approaching a church, there's gargoyles, right? The height, everything makes you look up. That was the point of the medieval mind. This building is about looking up. You follow me? Figuratively and literally looking up. In the Renaissance, we start to see people start to say, well, wait a minute, what about humans? Don't they matter? Should humans really be anonymous, right? Or should they be commended for their works? Should they be developed as individuals and persons? And this is what you start to see happen in the Renaissance. So let's talk a little bit about some important people and phrases and terms who came out of the Renaissance, okay? One of our first people that we want to talk about is a humanist named Petrarch, okay? Petrarch was a collector of manuscripts. That's weird for us to think about, because we don't really understand why being a collector of manuscripts, and he did other things as well, but why being a collector of manuscripts made you an important figure in the Renaissance? Well, there's a couple of issues here. Okay, first of all, when Petrarch was young, his father wanted him to be a lawyer. And he paid for Petrarch to go to school to prepare for a career in the law. That's what he thought Petrarch was destined for. Petrarch, though, had other ideas. He loved poetry, he loved writing, he loved history, and he spent a lot of time writing in his notebooks, composing his own original works, and searching and studying and hearing about the works of the past. His father became so frustrated that the story says that one time when Petrarch and his father were arguing about his future career, that he took up his son's notebooks and cast them into the fire to say, we're done with this, right? You're wasting your time. And Petrarch, his response was so emotional, and he leapt into the fire and put his hands in it to try to rescue his works, right? And so the story goes that his father, at that point, became convinced. Okay, this isn't just a passing phase, right? My son is invested in this with his life. And so he gave his blessing for Petrarch to pursue what we call the humanities, all right? So let's figure this out. What do we mean by a collector of manuscripts? Well, if you're a collector of lost manuscripts, they must be missing. What kind of manuscripts is he searching for? Greek and Roman manuscripts, because he's going back to the classical works. That's what he's interested in. Lost classical works, yes, that existed from the times of Greece and Rome. And we call this reawakening, yes, this rebirth of interest in this time period. We call it what, Alex? The Renaissance. So that's why Petrarch is an important name, because he represents the Renaissance. Let's look back and let's collect these manuscripts. In other words, what he says is these ancients, these people who lived years before us, they have something to tell us about what it means to be human. Remember, Greece and Rome were also, in their time, profitable, rich, settled, stable lands. And a lot of attention could be paid to discovery of the arts, the sciences, math, right? It wasn't just about the visual arts, it was about all kinds of art. Political oratory, okay? Can you, how about if I give you some topics and you tell me some Greek or Roman names associated with those things, right? Okay, how about in mathematics? He's later, go to Greece and Rome. So these names should sound Greek or Roman. Euclid. Geometry. Right? How about a theorem that you learned? Pythagoras. Yes? How about history? Greeks or Romans, super associated with the art of writing history. I got 3 you can come up with. Famous Greek or Roman historians. Homer, I would put in the category of literature, epic literature. How about, you put your name up if you've heard of it before, Herodotus. One person. Okay, how about Livy? How about Thucydides? All right, these are great, or maybe not so great, Greek, Roman, right, classical historians. How about in the area of philosophy? These are easy. Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, yes? Great classical philosophers. How about a great orator? This Roman orator is quoted all the time. Starts with C. Cicero, right? In Greece, oratory is lauded, right? The ability to speak well, the ability to speak convincingly is a skill that everyone wants, right? And I'm trying to think if it was, I cannot remember right now if it was Cicero or Solon. Have you ever heard the story about the Greek orator? This young child wanted to become one of Greek's great orators, but he had a speech impediment. And so he would go down to the sea, right? And do you remember who that is, Ainsley?
No, but it sounds.
I think it's Cicero. And he would gather up pebbles down by the sea and put them in his mouth, fill his mouth with pebbles, and force practice with his tongue to strengthen his muscles in his tongue. And he worked his way out of his speech impediment, became one of classical antiquity's great orators, right? That was the legend of what it means to be a great speaker, a great artist, right? If you think about Greek drama, remember? Classical drama, the comedy and tragedy masks, you know what I'm talking about? Whenever you see the symbol of drama, it's a picture of a smiley face and a sad face. Okay, we call it comedy and drama, right? Or comedy and tragedy. Okay, so the Greeks, you've heard of Oedipus Rex. You've heard of, trying to think of the name of this other play, Antigone, right? Tragedies or comedies that lay bare human emotion. All of these ideas are the things that Petrarch is interested in going back and looking at. He's interested in saying, what about their plays, their oratory, their history, their mathematics, their science, right? Thales, who did experiments with water displacement. And these guys, you have to realize that you might think, oh, I thought he was actually into philosophy, or I thought he was into math, or I thought, well, we have to understand something. These ancients, these classical authors, they did not limit themselves, this is an important statement I'm about to make, Ready? They didn't limit themselves to just one area of investigation. Very, very important. They did not limit themselves to one area of investigation. They believed that intellectual pursuit should span more than one category. We're going to talk about that today. All right? And so Petrarch began to collect these manuscripts, and his work had many other people follow. It became a thing in the Renaissance period to search for, look for, recover, and to whatever degree possible with the printing press, publish the works of the ancients. Now, I have to say something amazing about the internet, and you're not going to hear me say that there's too much amazing about the internet. Okay? Because I think it's brought some real problems to the society. However, every single name that we just mentioned, if I want to read any of that, all I have to do is walk over there, bring up a site called Internet Archive, type in, and I can get their actual work scanned by somebody. Anything I want. Anything I want intellectually is literally at my fingertips. That is mind-blowing, okay, for the society that chooses to use it. That's the slight problem, okay, is that the internet has this capability, but I'm not sure how many people are accessing the Republic or Euclid's Principles of Geometry. I think that we might be distracting ourselves to death with the stuff that we need right in front of us. We need for what, though? What do we need it for? You know what we need it for? Being human. That is what the Renaissance was saying. If you want to be a good human, then study the humanities. Study the art of being human. What do we mean the art of being human? Well, what we mean is the study of what makes a human, what makes a human good, okay? What makes for flourishing in a culture. And so the study of the humanities, it developed out of these ideas, okay? That the study of the arts, philosophy, mathematics, scientific principles, these things are worth investigating. And we shouldn't just say the best thing you can do is follow God's law and try to get to heaven and survive. We should open up our view to what does it really mean to be a great human or a good human. Now guys, the people of the Renaissance were not the first people to talk about this. So let's talk about this just for a second in terms of what the ancients said about it. Okay, are you ready? Okay, here we go. So I'm going to give you a very quick philosophical lesson. We're going to go down the road of philosophy for just a second, okay? Because I find that students don't really have a very good background in this, right? Do you know Plato's allegory of the cave? Have you studied Plato's allegory of the cave? Yes? You're talking about it in Bible? You're talking about it today?
Yes.
I'm going to talk about it first. Okay, so right, Plato's allegory of the cave. So, okay, let's talk about, first of all, there's a lot of debate in philosophy about who really said what, especially between Socrates and Plato. Because Socrates was the earliest, but he did not write books, write things down, or really start a formal school, okay? Plato did that instead. A lot of people think what Plato wrote about what Socrates said really was Plato's ideas, that he was interjecting as Socrates' ideas so that he could get credibility, all right? But kind of, who cares right now? Okay, Socrates arose in Greece as a competitor to a group of people called the Sophists. Okay, so everybody just relax a bit. Maybe write down a few key things, but I want to build our knowledge to go into the Renaissance right now. Okay? Ready? Here we go. Socrates. So in Greece, there were a group of people known as the Sophists. Okay? A sophist is essentially a person who is, what word do you hear in sophist? Don't say sophomore, although that is part of it. What word do you hear in sophist? You hear the beginning of the word sophisticated. Now, sometimes when someone's sophisticated, we mean that in a nice way. Sometimes when someone's sophisticated, they're just kind of like, right? They're a little too sophisticated for the simple ideas. Yes? So when you're at the 4th of July fireworks, and they start playing the Lee Greenwood, right, song, Proud to be an American. Some people are like, I guess that's great for common types, right? They're a little too sophisticated for patriotism. They're a little too sophisticated for people getting excited about their classes. Yeah. Right? The teacher says, oh, whoever can answer this question gets this small candy bar. The person says, I have a bag of those at home, so. Right? They're a little too sophisticated to play the game for candy. Yes? And does the Bible warn us that people can think they're too sophisticated for the simple gospel? It says that the gospel, the simplicity of the gospel, is a stumbling block for people who think they're too sophisticated for it. Oh, surely there must be more to it than this. This religion about a guy who's born in a manger and died. I'm sorry. I need something a little more complex, right? That's what we mean when we say a person is sophisticated in a bad way. We know it comes from the word sophist. So the sophists were a group of people in ancient Greece, and basically what they said is, we are so learned, so intellectual, and we're very, very, very good at oratory. We're very good at convincing people. And you can hire us out to make your argument. Okay, going back even further. Acts chapter 15, it's a famous passage in the Bible. Paul goes to Athens, and the Bible makes this statement. The people in Athens like to do nothing better with their time than what? What did they like to do in Athens? And Paul was walking around and he realized this about the people. Do you remember the story I'm talking about? When Paul goes out in Athens and he sees the gods, that they've got statues to every single god, and they even have a statue that's to the unknown god, the god one in case they forgot, right? And he's walking around Athens, and he says, and the passage says, the people in Athens like to do nothing better, we're talking about ancient Greece, right? They like to do nothing better than to talk about some new thing. They were philosophers. They were ideas people, right? And so that's what they like to do. And they had the money and the leisure time to be able to do it. So they're talking about these ideas, they're talking about these new things, and now Paul takes advantage of that. He comes and he says, you want to hear a new idea? I'll tell you a new idea. You know your unknown God statue? I know who it is. And he begins to make a philosophical and biblical argument. Yes? Well, in that city, you have also a group of people called the Sophists. And what they basically said is, we're so good at convincing, persuading, and oratory that we can win any side of the argument. Just hire us, and we'll make your case. We specialize in being sophisticated. In other words, we don't really take a position on the issue of, is it true or false? That's a little bit, I guess, is it right or wrong, true or false? What matters is, can you make a good argument? You follow me on this? That's called a sophist. And the sophists say, it doesn't matter what's true or false or wrong or right. What matters is that you're good at winning people over to your side. That's the sophists. Socrates rose to combat these people. Socrates rose out of, opposition to the sophist view. And Socrates said, you know what? What matters is what is true. Now, was Socrates a Christian? No. Okay? But he still understood a basic principle of the world. He said, no, Nothing matters except the style of things. And what I'm saying is, what matters is the substance of things. And finding truth, or finding good, or finding the good, or finding the one. Here you start to have some principles emerge. Now, we can't go too far back into Greek history in talking about the finding of the one, and this is where the emphasis on earth, air, wind, and fire as the center of the universe came from, Heraclitus, Thales, all that. We can't really go into that, okay? But Socrates comes about and he says, you know what? There's something true. There's something worth pursuing. Now, when you read about Socrates, remember, he didn't write his own books. So Plato wrote them, and there are a series of books. Meno is one of them as an example. We call them the Socratic blanks. The Socratic dialogues. What's a dialogue? Conversation between people, right? We're having a dialogue. When you learn how to write dialogue in your English class, you have to learn how to write your quotes and then switch speakers, right? A dialogue is a back and forth. If you have one of Socrates' dialogues that Plato wrote down, okay, Plato recorded these, you would notice that they read like a play, Socrates, right? Euthyphro, or Meno, or whoever he's speaking to, this, right? And what they are is a dialogue where Socrates will keep doing what? What does Socrates do in the dialogues? He is making an argument, but it's always done from this method. What? Questions. Questions. Socrates, what was his nickname? The gadfly. You're annoying, Socrates. You're like a fly that you can't get rid of, right? And you're trying to swat at it and get it out of your face, and it just keeps right? Socrates, he got called the gadfly because what he did is get down to the bottom of the matter. So the sophists would be in the square, plying their trade, right? They would say, this person, right? Because these were often lawyers. They would say, this person is guilty of a lack of loyalty to their family. They're guilty of forgetting filial piety, right? The love for family. And so Socrates would say, what is love? What is faith? What is family? What is a son? What is a father? And he kept asking for definition, right? He kept pressing, every time he engaged in a dialogue, he kept pressing for the people to define, what do you mean by faithfulness? What do you mean by love? What do you mean by loyalty? When someone says, well, loyalty is simply what you owe to people. You would say, well, what do you mean by owe? Well, it's what you should give them. What do you mean by should? Now, is Socrates just playing word games? Is he just like, when a little kid figures out that they can ask why? Do you remember that time when you figured it out and you said to your parent, somebody would tell you, someone in authority would tell you something, you go, why? And they said, because I just told you to. Why? Because I want this done. Why? Because the house needs to be clean. Why? So that our guests don't think we're pigs. Why are we here? Right? And so you keep, and then eventually your parents say, stop asking that. Right? Because they say, because I'm in charge, I'm going to spank you if you ask that again. Right? Unless they're very mom. So we say, and they say, you can ask anything you want, Johnny. And so we have this idea, right, that we figure it out. Wait a minute, there's a why question to be asked. And Socrates is not dumb, and he's not playing word games. He's trying to make a point. That's what the Socratic dialogues are about. Getting people to the point where, and in almost every Socratic dialogue, the sophist walks away. He says, you know what, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Because he puts them in this position that they can't really make the argument they're making, and it does matter whether something's true or not. and he explodes their argument from the inside out. So Socrates, as a philosopher, is wanting society to investigate these things and to get to, through the dialogues, it's not a word game, it's not a thing of like, oh, I destroyed him, check it out. Socrates is the one that got destroyed in the end by the society, right? Because they said, you are too much of a disruptor. Yes? So Socrates had to? Well, he had to drink poison, right? The death of Socrates. He had to drink poison as capital punishment from the state. And the reason why is you're a disruptor. You're causing young people to ask questions that we don't want them to ask. You're causing society to be disrupted, and your kind of questions make people not do what we want them to do, frankly and flatly. And so Socrates dies. But his ideas and his challenges to the society live on in his student, Plato. So Plato tells a story, okay? He tells a story, and the story is called the allegory of the cave. So he says, all right, imagine that there are some people. And these people, they exist in some chairs. Now, I would make this diagram in your notes, okay? I would do that. So, you can see if Mr. recognize a discussion of the cave differs at all. All right, so these people, they sit in chairs, and what Socrates says, and of course Plato is writing about this allegory, okay? He's writing about this. He says the people are they're actually chained to the chairs. So these people are sitting in a cave, but they are, in reality, they are chained there. And what happens is that there is a fire, and there are also a group of people, and this group of people, let's put them behind. This group of people, they walk around in a circle. And each of the people holds a figure. Maybe they hold a figure of a sword, or a dog, or a book, or a crown. They hold this small figure, a carved figure. Yes? And they hold it up, and they walk in a circle, and the fire in the cave casts a shadow. And so on the wall of the cave appears a crown, a sword, and a dog. Okay, I'm making these up. Yes? But on the wall of the cave there are some shadows. And the people in the cave, they spend their lives guessing what the shadows are. Now, you guys have played the shadow game before, right? Why is it a game? You know, the light is on from a projector and somebody comes and they make the bunny rabbit, right? Everybody does that. And so, oh, that's a bunny rabbit. They make something else. Oh, that's this. Why is the shadow game a game? Why is it a contest? This is easy. This isn't like a historical answer. Why is it a contest?
So you can be right and guess what they're trying to say.
Yeah, why would you be wrong? Is everyone in the room stupid? What would cause them to be wrong about their guess?
If it's like open to interpretation.
Okay, and what makes it open to interpretation?
Like if it's not supposed to be something.
Okay, because shadows are by definition a little unclear, right? if we say a shadowy figure, we mean a figure that I can't really discern totally. With me on that? So somebody puts up a bunny rabbit and then somebody goes, that doesn't look like a bunny rabbit at all. But yeah, it does. See, someone points out to you, here's the ears, here's the, you with me on this? And so these people, they look at the wall all day and guess at the shadows. And Plato tells us how some of the people in the cave are really, really good at the shadow game. They excel at it. They're the best shadow guessers ever. And everyone's like, they always get it. They always get the shadows. And I'm not that good at it. And they're definitely better shadow guessers, and they're more elite, and everyone's, watch this. Right? I know these. So, life in the cave goes on, right? And then one day, somebody comes down a ladder into the cave. And when they come down into the cave, they come down that ladder, they walk over to the people in the chairs, and they say, you are not seeing the real thing. All you know about are shadows. Who do you think responds first to that? This isn't great history knowledge or knowledge of the cave. I just want you to tell me from your knowledge of humanity. Lexi.
The people who think they're better.
Mm-hmm. What? What do you mean, just shadows? I don't know if you know me, you're new here, but I'm very good at this. So, and the person says, look, I can't even see down here, it's so dark, okay? I'm having trouble adjusting to what it looks like down here, but I do know one thing. I came from a place of light. This place is not the real world. Oh, if you're the king of the shadow world, that's pretty offensive. Because your whole thing is predicated on. And the person from the outside says, you gotta get out of here. You're tied up, you're chained to these chairs. The only place that you can look is forward. And that's why you think that this is all there is. But I'm here to tell you that there's more than this. And so, this person has to cut the chains, untie the ropes. But the people in the chairs, many of them don't want to go. They're fighting the person, they're punching the person. Like, get away from me, you're messing up my world. The person coming down into the cave takes them by the scruff of their neck, and they force them to turn around. And what they see is a fire. And it's bright, because they've never seen it before. They've only seen the shadows cast, and so they start to just float down. What are you doing to me? This is painful. This is disruptive. I want to stay in my comfortable seat. But the man from the ladder continues to push them past the fire and up the ladder. And as they go up the ladder, things are getting way worse because outside there's daylight, sun. When they get outside, they can't look up for anything. Right? Or turn the light on in the bathroom at night, and it literally hurts you, right? And you just put your head down, your mom comes in the morning, you won't get up, so she puts the brightest light in your room on, right? And you instantly, I don't want this, right? And you say, stop! Hopefully you don't say that to your mom, but, okay? But you flinch from this. Go outside, the light's painful, it's awful. Let me ask you this. When can you see better during the night? When it's dark or when that light just comes on? When it's dark. That's kind of interesting. Because when that light comes on, you're actually blinded. And so the people are forced up into the light and they say, this is worse. I was so comfortable down there. And down there, I could see. In fact, I was the best. And now I'm up here, and you're forcing it, and I don't like it, and it's painful, and I can't see a darn thing. You're wrong. Down there, I can see. Up here, I can't see anything. And Socrates, right, our person on the ladder, he forces the people to stay out. And suddenly they look down and they see a flower. And they look down and they see a crown. And they look down and they see a dog. And what do they realize about, that's a dog. Okay, what do they realize about these things? Wait a minute, that's a dog? That's a crown? That's a sword? That's a flower? The thing that I've been looking at might be similar, but this thing has line, definition, color, life, attributes that if I had been down there looking at the shadows, no matter how long I stayed there, I would have never known what it really was. With me? And after a time in the light, their eyes begin to adjust. And they're able to distinguish a real dog, a real flower, a real sword. And eventually, they're not only able to look parallel, to stop looking at the ground and wishing they were in the cave, they're able to look parallel. Eventually, they're able to look up. And when they look up, they see that there's a light source that's allowing them to see all these things. Do you see what's happened? We've moved from shadows to, uh-oh, there's a fire, to, uh-oh, there are real world things. But when you look up to the light source, you realize without that, I wouldn't even be able to see the things that are real. Uh-oh. Because Socrates says, where is the real thing on the board? When Socrates says what really is, right, where does he place reality? Here? No. Here? Here? Here. Okay, get ready. Because he says these things are actually also just reflections of the world of the forms. The world of the forms. Okay, here we go. Let's talk about fast food hamburgers. Get a scrap piece of paper or the side of your notes, I do not care. Okay? And I want you to write the best to worst fast food hamburgers. Best on the top, worst on the bottom, go. Write down the best fast food hamburgers. Best on top, worst on the bottom. I'll give you 2 minutes to complete this exercise. Sure. Best to worst, no consulting, no consulting. Best to worst fast food hamburgers. We've gone from platonic truths to hamburgers. Best to worst fast food hamburgers. Please don't say that. I don't eat fast food. I don't eat fast food hamburgers at all. Well, write it down anyway. I'm sure sometime in your life you tasted one. If you can't do hamburgers, do chicken nuggets.
Oh, I think it's chicken nuggets.
Okay.
I can tell you better.
Best to worst. 1 minute. Yes.
So with the chicken nuggets, can it be like just like something similar to that?
Yes. I'll allow it. Do you expect that we'll have the same answers? All right, here I come. We already have some disagreement. We have strong disagreement. We just are just first three people. It's problematic.
Oh, I only got 5 guys.
Okay?
Guys, that's fine.
All right. Okay. All right. Some very, very interesting responses. A lot of people have McDonald's on the bottom, but almost as many people have McDonald's at the top.
No.
And some people have Five Guys as their only answer, and other people have Five Guys at the bottom.
Okay, so sorry, Five Guys is better than McDonald's any day of the week. It's too good.
I know, it's
Consider it as fast food.
That's not fast food.
Some people have Burger King stuck in the middle somewhere, but Wendy's is highly rated.
I was gonna say, I was thinking like an actual like burger, not like cheeseburger, like McDonald's.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Like a Wendy's burger or a Hardee's burger, like lettuce and tomato, and actual burgers.
Oh, that's an actual burger?
No.
Like not a cheeseburger.
Okay, I'm sorry, but Hardee's and McDonald's are both equally bad. Sorry.
Yes.
You haven't had a good hamburger.
Obviously, most fast food joints are not going to have cheeseburgers because it's a fast food joint. But it's tasty. That's what I.
I like McDonald's for all the extra stuff. Really makes me want more.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of different answers out there. So here's the question. Before we get to who's right and wrong, let's get to this. When I asked you to do this, no one raised their hand and said, I need instructions about how to do the order. You just started writing down burgers in order. Now we came up with different answers, but you just started writing down, the top one is this, the bottom one is this. How did you know what to put on top and what to put on bottom? How did you go about making the list, Carly? How did you do that? Thought about all the different fast food places and thought about which ones are the best. And how did you go about with your criteria of the best? Let's think about this. Did you compare the burgers to each other? Or did you compare the burgers to something else? That is a very important question, and it's a very philosophical question. Very philosophical. Did you compare the burgers to each other, or did you compare the burgers to something else? What do you think?
I did each other. Like I thought about where I actually get burgers from, and then how I like them.
Okay, so let's say, what was your top one?
Ralph's Burgers. Most people don't know what that is, but it's a place in Chiefland.
Okay.
And it's like literally just for burgers, and you drive through, and they're really good. They're like homemade.
Okay, is a Ralph's Burger, what's your second answer?
Steak and shake burger.
Okay, is a Ralph's Burger better than a Steak and Shake burger? Because of, how did you put that over Steak and Shake? Did you think, well, a Steak and Shake burger is this, but I can think of something better? Or did you say Ralph's,
I like it better, like I think it tastes better, it has better quality.
right? Okay. Well, look at your top choice. Look at your top choice. Is there anything that you can think of that would improve that top choice burger? You say, I love this, but the one thing I wish was different is X.
It had no onions.
If it had no onions. If they put a little bit more sesame seeds on it, or a little bit less. If instead of 2 pickles, they had 3, where they took them off, right? Now think about something. When you're making those kind of little distinctions, are you comparing that to other burgers, or are you comparing it to an ideal burger? If I ask you to rate chocolate ice creams by brand,
Oh,
you would have to have the ideal chocolate ice cream in mind. Get ready. Are you comparing those burgers to each other or to something else? You're comparing it to something else. And you know what it is? The ideal burger. And you know where it exists? In the mind of God. Yes. That's what the forms are. The forms. Who in here has ever had a good dog? You've had a good dog in your life. Who's had a great dog? Who's had a not so good dog? Well, that's very interesting. Are you comparing your dogs to each other? You could. You say, I like this dog better than this dog. But when you say, I've got a great dog, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by a great dog or a good dog?
my dog is closest to the ideal dog.
Closest to the ideal dog. What's the ideal dog? How do we as a society rate the ideal dog? Loyal, obedient, sweet, faithful, right? Likes to snuggle. If I said to you, how many of you have a great attack dog? You would instantly switch the category. An attack dog, it needs to be ferocious, right? A hellhound, like our 9th grade summer reading, okay? Right? It needs to have a core of evil, and it also needs to be loyal. Wouldn't you still include loyal because you don't want the attack dog attacking you? So it has to know who to attack and who not to. But you would start to categorize. When I say to you, who is the greatest friend you have? You begin to, you do. And you aren't saying, well, she's better than her, she's better than her. Yeah, you can do that, but what you're doing is what is closest to the ideal friend. Loyal, a good companion, faithful, shows love, doesn't gossip. Get me? 1 Corinthians 13, it's a biblical passage that says, this is love. It's read at everybody's weddings, it's on cards. But you know what it's saying? This is what love is. Now, rank your loves based on this, an ideal. And what Socrates says is, he gets at that there's a world of forms. So this dog is not the real dog. It's real in the sense that, yes, you can touch it, yeah, but this dog is a reflection of an idea called dog. This crown is a reflection of an idea called crown. Get ready. This king is a reflection, poor or good, of the idea of a king. This love that you experience here is a reflection of an ideal called love. Justice, as it's carried out here, is a reflection, poor or good, of an idea called justice. But what Socrates says is, this idea has to come from somewhere. Got me? And he said it comes from the world of the forms, and this also had a reflection in the desire to seek the one. Truth, the world of the forms, as Christians, we say that this is God. That perfection of all kinds emanates from God, and that what we see in the world, even if its best reflection, is just that, a reflection. That's why our marriages, okay, are to mirror a love relationship that someday we will know perfectly. Do people have perfect marriages? No, but do you want your marriage to reflect God's idea of marriage? You should say yes, because He's the one who made it up. And so He knows what the ideal is. And so Socrates says, don't think to yourselves, don't think like Sophos. Don't think that you're there ordering things as the way that you see it. And it's just based on, oh, this burger, I have all these ideas about burgers. No, there's an idea in your mind of the ideal burger, and you're rating it. And so what Socrates would say is, somebody's right and somebody's wrong in this room. Burgers are not in the eye of the burger beholder. He would say, somebody's got good ideas about burgers and bad ideas about burgers, because he would say somewhere in the universe there is an ideal burger and then ones that more live up to it and less live up to it. But the truth is, when you say, that person is a bad friend, and I'm going to choose to end this relationship because they are such a poor friend to me, they are falling short of some ideal. You with me? Don't all our friends fall short of our ideals? Yes, but some people fall so far short of an ideal that we say, done. Correct? When you own your own business someday and you have employees, will you have perfect employees? Would you ever fire an employee? Yes, if they fall so far short of the ideal, they say, well, you know what? I can put up with you being late once a month. What I can't put up with is you taking all my profits out of the drawer at night. That is not an ideal employee. That's the opposite of an employee. I hire you to help my business, you're hurting my business, you're gone. When you do that, you're using the ideal employee. You're not saying, well, you're better than him, so I'll just order it. You're not doing that. You're like, that's not ideal. It is not ideal for you to work here. And you're calling on this idea that Plato wrote about Socrates as the deliverer. Yes? What is he delivering people from? The world of the, that's the world of the form. This is the world of the what? Shadows. He's taking people out of darkness into light. Is this talking about Christianity? No. Are there clear parallels here? And so the world of the shadows goes up into the light, and these people, Plato writes, they don't think the deliverer, they want to kill the deliverer. And they do, by making him drink poison. They're so ticked that he's brought them into the light and made them uncomfortable that they say, you must die because you're disrupting my world of the shadows. What does Socrates get called for this delivery? Delivery, you're hearing that word? As the deliverer, you know what he gets called? The intellectual midwife. What does a midwife do? Delivers babies. This is called, if you want to be fancy and show off for Mr. Ecker, it's called intellectual midwifery. All right? It means delivering people from the world of the shadows into the world of the forms, into an acquaintance with the world of the forms, and it is painful, and it is laborious. You get the birth analogy? It's laborious, it's difficult, it's a journey that people don't want to take. When that baby comes out, it's screaming, right? Because it is a difficult journey. But it is a journey that must happen or else you die. A baby cannot stay in the womb forever, correct? And so Socrates says to find real life, we must go on this journey. And for him, Socrates is an intellectual midwife who has given us the way to be introduced to the world of the forms and to go after what's true. Do you understand that when You have these Renaissance people like Petrarch, and they're going back and they're reading these ideas that they're like, we've been content with not really investigating this. We have been so focused on survival, disease, go back to the beginning of class, famine, war, bubonic plague, rats, that we're forgetting. Got me? Sometimes at school, we have the opportunity to interview teachers that want to work here. And I remember we were doing one particular interview of a teacher, and the teacher was talking about their subject that they wanted to come and teach. And they said, when I teach my students, I think it's very important for me to give them things that matter to them in the real world. Because if you don't talk to students about the real world, then they'll just disconnect and tune out. And so I try to talk about things that matter to them in the real world and connect it to real world ideas. Have you ever heard a speech like that, a topic like that, a talk like that? Real world. And C.S. Lewis asks us a very important question in his critique letters. What is the real world? Right? What does it mean when a teacher sometimes, I'm not saying always, what does it mean when somebody says something like, oh, I connect kids in the real world? What do you mean by the real world? Instagram posts? Is that the real world? Newspaper articles? Today's current events? Yeah, I mean, that's real. There's nothing wrong with using burgers as a teaching tool. Follow me? Using burgers as the teaching tool and connecting it to the real world. Okay, and what do we mean? Something tangible, something touchable, something that we know, simplifying an idea, I got that. But what we talked about today is the real world. You follow me? Not some kind of let me try to be relatable. We have to be very careful about what we define as the real world. Because what I'm getting at is that you can rate burgers, okay? But you will also rate spouses. You understand what I'm saying? You know, look at a person that's asking you to marry them, and you're going to say, is this the husband or wife that I should be with? And it should be compared to an ideal. Not, well, it's the best thing I got going. It should be compared to an ideal, yes? Who is this? Oh, it's chapel day.
Yeah.
Ooh, get out of here. Go, go, go. Literacy list, next class, 10 items.